Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, staring at the strange signal that had appeared on their screens 3 hours ago. The distress beacon was unlike anything they had seen before. It came from a system that their star map showed as empty space. "Are you sure about these readings, Lieutenant Carter?" Jake asked the young woman at the communication station. Amy Carter nodded, her blonde hair catching the blue light from her console. "Yes, sir. The signal is definitely coming from the Kepler 442 system. But according to our records, there's nothing there except a dead planet." Jake rubbed his chin. The USS Liberty was on a routine exploration mission, mapping new trade routes for Earth's growing merchant fleet. They had been traveling for 6 months, and this was the first interesting thing they had found. "Set course for the system," Jake ordered. "Maximum speed." The Liberty's engines hummed to life, and the ship jumped into hyperspace. 3 days later, they dropped back into normal space near Kepler 442. What they saw made everyone on the bridge gasp. A massive structure floated in orbit around the dead planet. It was easily 10 miles long and shaped like a giant ring. Strange lights pulsed along its surface, and several smaller ships moved around it like busy insects. "My God," whispered Dr. Ben Rodriguez, the ship's doctor who had come to the bridge to see what they had found. "What is that thing?" Amy ran the structure through their computer database. After a few minutes, she looked up with surprise. "Captain, the computer says this matches Zolorian architecture, but that's impossible." Jake frowned. The Zolorians were a peaceful alien race that Earth had made contact with only 2 years ago. They were traders who claimed to travel between many different worlds, buying and selling goods. They had seemed friendly enough, and several trade agreements had been signed with them. "Scan the structure," Jake ordered. "I want to know everything about it." The Liberty's sensors swept over the alien facility. The results were puzzling. The structure was definitely Zolorian, but it was much larger than anything they had seen before. It also appeared to be very old, maybe hundreds of years old. "Captain," called out Lieutenant Pete Jackson from the science station. "I'm reading life signs inside that thing, hundreds of them. But they're strange, very small, and they're all in some kind of stasis." Jake felt a cold chill run down his spine. "Small? How small?" "About the size of human children, sir." The bridge fell silent. Everyone stared at the massive alien structure floating in the darkness of space. If there were children inside, why were they in stasis? And why were they here, so far from any inhabited world? "We need to get inside that thing," Jake said finally. "Amy, prepare a shuttle. Take Ben and Pete with you. I want to know what's going on in there." Amy nodded. "What about the Zolorian ships, sir? They might not want us poking around." Jake looked at the smaller alien vessels moving around the structure. They hadn't tried to communicate or approach the Liberty. In fact, they seemed to be ignoring the human ship completely. "We'll worry about that if it happens. Right now, if there are children in trouble in there, we have a duty to help them." An hour later, Amy guided the shuttle toward a docking bay on the alien structure. The Zolorian ships continued to ignore them, which made everyone nervous. It was as if the aliens didn't care that uninvited guests were boarding their facility. The docking bay was huge and filled with strange machinery. The shuttle landed with a soft thump, and Amy turned off the engines. Through the shuttle's windows, they could see that the bay had atmosphere, but it was very cold. "Suits on," Amy ordered. "We don't know what kind of air they're breathing in there." The 3 humans put on their spacesuits and left the shuttle. The alien facility was eerily quiet. Their footsteps echoed in the empty corridors as they made their way deeper into the structure. Ben carried a medical scanner, and it began beeping frantically as they walked. "The life signs are getting stronger," he reported. "We're close to whatever's in here." They turned a corner and found themselves in front of a massive door. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, and a soft blue light glowed around its edges. Amy pressed her hand against a panel next to the door, and it slid open with a hiss. What they found inside made all 3 humans freeze in horror. The room was enormous, stretching out further than they could see. Along the walls were hundreds of small chambers, each one about the size of a phone booth. Inside each chamber was a small figure floating in a clear liquid, connected to tubes and wires. "Dear God," Ben whispered. They're children, human children. Amy moved closer to one of the chambers. Inside was a little girl who looked about 8 years old. She had brown hair and was wearing a simple gray uniform. A number was tattooed on her arm. 247. How is this possible? Pete asked, his voice shaking. How did human children get here? Ben was already scanning the nearest chamber with his medical equipment. She's alive, but in deep stasis. Her brain activity is minimal, just enough to keep her body functioning. He looked at his scanner again. Amy, according to this, she's been in here for at least 20 years. 20 years? Amy stared at the little girl in the chamber. But that's impossible. We only made contact with aliens 2 years ago. They moved through the facility, finding room after room filled with the chambers. There were hundreds of children, all human, all in the same gray uniforms with numbers on their arms. The youngest looked about 5 years old and the oldest maybe 16. In one room, Pete found something that made his blood run cold. It was a computer terminal with files written in Zilorian text. Using the translation program on his tablet, he began to read. Amy, you need to see this, he called out. She hurried over and read the translated text over his shoulder. What she saw made her stomach turn. The files described the children as test subjects for cognitive development research and emotional response analysis specimens. There were detailed notes about each child, describing their reactions to different situations and their psychological profiles. They're experimenting on them, Amy said, her voice filled with rage. These alien monsters are using human children as lab rats. Ben joined them at the terminal. Look at this, he said, pointing to another file. It says here that the children were acquired through standard collection protocols from Earth. They have detailed records of where each child was taken from. Amy read through the list of locations. Schools, playgrounds, summer camps, shopping centers. All places where children would be easy to take without being noticed right away. We have to get back to the ship, she said. Captain Morrison needs to know about this immediately. As they made their way back through the facility, Amy couldn't stop thinking about the little girl in chamber 247. How long had she been floating in that liquid, unaware that years were passing by? Did she dream? Did she wonder why she couldn't wake up? When they reached their shuttle, Amy sent an urgent message back to the Liberty. Within minutes, Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. Are you certain about what you found? He asked. Yes, sir. Hundreds of human children, all in stasis. The aliens have been experimenting on them for decades. There was a long pause before Morrison spoke again. Get back here immediately. We're calling this into Earth Command. This changes everything. Admiral Frank Cooper received Captain Morrison's emergency message while he was having breakfast in his quarters on Earth Station Alpha. He dropped his coffee cup when he read the report, and the hot liquid spilled across his desk. Get me a direct line to Earth Command, he barked at his aide. Priority 1, and prepare the entire Third Fleet for immediate departure. Within 6 hours, 30 warships were racing toward the Kepler 442 system. Admiral Cooper commanded the fleet from his flagship, the USS Washington. He had served in the Earth Defense Force for 25 years, but nothing had prepared him for this. Back on the Liberty, Captain Morrison watched as Dr. Rodriguez and Counselor Mary Johnson worked to revive the first group of children. They had chosen the oldest ones first, thinking they might be better able to handle the shock of waking up. The first chamber they opened contained a boy who looked about 16. His file said his name was Danny Walsh, and he had been taken from a school trip to a museum in Chicago 22 years ago. Dr. Rodriguez carefully removed the tubes and wires, then began the revival process. His vital signs are getting stronger, Ben reported. Heart rate is increasing, brain activity is returning to normal levels. Mary Johnson stood beside the medical bed, ready to help the boy when he woke up. She had dealt with trauma victims before, but never anything like this. Danny's eyes fluttered open. He looked around the medical bay with confusion, then sat up quickly. Where am I? He asked, his voice rough from years of not speaking. Where's my class? We were supposed to meet back at the bus. Mary gently placed her hand on his shoulder. Danny, my name is Mary. You're safe now. You're on a human ship called the Liberty. A ship? Danny looked more confused. But we were just at the museum. Mrs. Peterson said we had to stay with our groups. He paused, studying Mary's face. You look older than Mrs. Peterson. Are you a new teacher? Mary felt her heart break. To Danny, only minutes had passed since he was taken from his school group. He had no idea that more than 20 years had gone by. Danny, I need you to listen carefully. Something happened to you. You've been asleep for a very long time. Asleep? But I just closed my eyes for a second when that man in the white coat told me to. Danny's voice started to shake. I want to go home. I want to see my mom and dad. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward. Danny, we're going to help you get home. But first, we need to make sure you're healthy. Can you tell me what you remember? About the man in the white coat? Danny thought for a moment. He was tall and had weird gray skin. His eyes were really big and he didn't have much hair. He said I was going to a special school where I could learn amazing things. Danny looked around the medical bay again. This doesn't look like a school. No, it's not, Mary said softly. Danny, the man who took you was an alien. Do you know what that means? Danny's eyes went wide. Like from outer space? But that's just in movies. Over the next few hours, they revived 5 more children. Each one had the same reaction: confusion, fear, and the belief that only minutes had passed since they were taken. A 10-year-old girl named Katie Foster kept asking for her mother. A 12-year-old boy named Alex Turner wanted to know if he was going to miss his soccer game. The hardest part was explaining to them that their families thought they were dead, that decades had passed, that the world had moved on without them. Dr. Rodriguez was running medical scans on all the children when he made a disturbing discovery. Captain, you need to see this. He called Morrison to the medical bay. What is it, Ben? Their bodies have been artificially maintained at the age they were when taken. But look at their brain scans. Ben showed Morrison the results on his tablet. Their minds have been active the whole time. The aliens were running tests on them while they slept. Morrison felt sick. What kind of tests? Memory tests, problem-solving exercises, emotional response scenarios. The aliens were studying how human children think and react to different situations. Mary Johnson had been listening to the conversation. That explains why they're all so confused. Their subconscious minds have been working for 20 years, but they don't remember any of it. 2 days later, the Third Fleet arrived in the system. Admiral Cooper was shocked when he saw the massive alien facility. He had expected something, small, maybe a research station. This was the size of a small city. Captain Morrison, this is Admiral Cooper. Prepare to receive me aboard your ship. An hour later, Cooper stood in the Liberty's briefing room, listening as Morrison and his team explained what they had found. The Admiral's face grew darker with each detail. How many children are there? Cooper asked. We count at least 400, sir, Amy Carter reported. Maybe more. We haven't been able to search the entire facility yet. Cooper was about to respond when alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Lieutenant Jackson's voice came over the intercom. Captain, we have multiple ships approaching. There's a Lorian. Everyone rushed to the bridge. On the main screen, they could see a fleet of elegant alien ships approaching the facility. The lead ship was much larger than the others. Clearly, a diplomatic vessel. Incoming transmission, Jackson reported. Put it on screen, Morrison ordered. The image that appeared showed a tall, thin alien with gray skin and large black eyes. He wore elaborate robes and had an air of authority about him. I am Ambassador Krell of the Zolorian Trade Coalition, the alien said in perfect English. I demand to know why human warships are threatening our research facility. Admiral Cooper stepped forward. I am Admiral Cooper of the Earth Defense Force. We're not threatening anyone. We're rescuing kidnapped human children. Krell's large eyes seemed to grow even larger. Kidnapped? That is impossible. All our research subjects were acquired through proper legal channels. Legal channels? Cooper's voice was filled with rage. Show me the paperwork. Show me the permissions from Earth authorities to take our children. There was a long pause. Krell's confident expression began to waver. The agreements were made with your planetary authorities. Surely you have records of this. We made first contact with your people 2 years ago, Morrison said. These children have been here for over 20 years. How do you explain that? Krell looked uncomfortable. There must be some mistake. I was not aware that this facility contained human subjects. I thought it was used for studying other species. Dr. Helen Price, the fleet's xenopsychologist, had joined them on the bridge. She studied Krell's body language carefully. He's lying, she whispered to Cooper. Look at how he keeps touching his neck. That's a sign of stress in Zilorians. Cooper activated a private channel to his fleet commanders. All ships, battle stations, be ready for anything. On the main screen, Krell was speaking with someone off camera in the Zilorian language. When he turned back, his expression was different, more worried. Admiral Cooper, I have just been informed by my government that this facility was operated by a rogue scientific group. We had no knowledge of their illegal activities. Rogue group? Cooper laughed bitterly. That facility is the size of a city. It would take thousands of people to operate it. Are you telling me that thousands of your people went rogue without your government noticing? Dr. Price stepped forward. Ambassador Krell, if your government truly had no knowledge of this, then you won't mind if we examine all the records from this facility. You'll also allow us to question the aliens who work here. Krell shifted nervously. That would not be possible. The facility contains sensitive research that cannot be shared with other species. More sensitive than kidnapping and experimenting on children? Morrison asked. In the medical bay, Danny Walsh was talking to Mary Johnson. Mrs. Johnson, the other kids are scared. They keep asking when they can go home. What should I tell them? Mary looked at the boy who should have been a grown man by now. Despite everything that had happened to him, he was still trying to take care of the younger children. Tell them that there are a lot of people working very hard to get them home, she said. And Danny? You're very brave for looking after the little ones. Danny nodded seriously. My dad always said that big kids should protect little kids, even though I'm not really big anymore. Back on the bridge, the standoff with Ambassador Krell continued. More Zilorian ships had arrived, but they were clearly outgunned by the human fleet. Ambassador, Admiral Cooper said finally, you have 1 hour to turn over all personnel from that facility and all research records. If you refuse, we will consider this an act of war against humanity. Krell's face went pale. Admiral, surely we can reach some agreement. Perhaps compensation for any misunderstanding. The only compensation I want is justice for those children. Cooper replied. 1 hour, Ambassador, make your choice. The news reached Earth in less than 12 hours. President Andrew Clark was in an emergency meeting with his cabinet when the report came in. The room fell silent as they read the details about the imprisoned children. 400 children, the president said quietly. Some of them taken when they were just 5 years old. He looked up at his advisors. How many families have been grieving for decades thinking their children were dead? Defense Secretary Lisa Morgan nodded grimly. Mr. President, we've already identified dozens of families from the missing persons reports. The Walsh family from Chicago, the Foster family from Denver, the Turner family from Boston. They all filed reports when their children disappeared. President Clark stood up and walked to the window. Recall every diplomat from Zilorian space immediately. Cancel all trade agreements. As of this moment, we consider the Zilorian Empire to be hostile. Meanwhile, aboard the Liberty, more children were being awakened. Katie Foster, the 10-year-old girl from Denver, sat on the edge of a medical bed with tears streaming down her face. I want my mommy, she whispered to Mary Johnson. She told me to stay close to her at the shopping mall. But then that man said he had puppies to show me and I followed him to his van. Mary's heart ached as she listened to Katie's story. It was the same pattern with all the children. They had been lured away with promises of treats, games, or special trips, then taken by aliens pretending to be human. Dr. Rodriguez was examining 12-year-old Alex Turner when the boy grabbed his arm. Doctor, I need to tell you something important. I could hear them talking sometimes when I was asleep. What did you hear, Alex? The gray people with the big eyes. They spoke in a weird language, but after a while I started to understand some of it. Alex looked scared. They were talking about making more places like this one. They said humans were the best subjects they ever found. Ben immediately called Captain Morrison. "Captain, you need to hear this." Alex overheard the aliens talking about other facilities. Morrison arrived in the medical bay within minutes. He knelt down beside Alex's bed. "Can you tell me exactly what you heard, son?" Alex nodded. "The tall one, the one who seemed to be in charge, he said that human children were special. He said, our minds work differently from other species they studied. He kept saying we never gave up hope even when we were scared." "Did they say anything about other places with children?" "Yes, sir. The tall one said they had 12 other stations like this one. He said they needed to study more human children to understand why we're so—" what was the word? Adaptable. Morrison felt his blood run cold. If there were 12 other facilities, that could mean thousands more children. On the bridge, Admiral Cooper was getting reports from his intelligence officers. Commander Steve Kelly had been analyzing the data they recovered from the alien facility. "Admiral, we found something disturbing in their records," Kelly reported. "This isn't just about human children. The Zalorians have been doing this to other species too." "What do you mean?" "We found files on at least 15 different alien species, children from planets across the galaxy, but the humans seem to be their primary focus now." Dr. Helen Price, who had been studying the alien psychology, joined the conversation. "Admiral, I think I know why they're so interested in human children specifically." "Explain." "Look at these test results," she said, showing him a tablet with translated alien data. The Zalorians tested children from many species for problem-solving, creativity, and emotional resilience. Human children scored higher than any other species in all categories. Cooper studied the data. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that even under terrible conditions, even when they were scared and alone, human children never stopped trying to find solutions. They never lost hope that someone would come to save them. The alien researchers were fascinated by this." Back in the medical bay, 16-year-old Danny Walsh was talking to the younger children, trying to keep them calm. Even though he was just a teenager himself, he had naturally become their leader. "Listen, guys," he said to a group of scared kids sitting around him. "I know this is really confusing and scary, but the nice people on this ship, they're going to help us get home." 8-year-old Sarah Cooper raised her hand like she was in school. "But Danny, what if our families don't want us anymore? What if they forgot about us?" Danny's eyes filled with tears, but he kept his voice steady. "Sarah, families never forget their children. Never. My dad used to tell me that parents love their kids no matter what happens." Mary Johnson watched from across the room, amazed by Danny's strength. Despite everything he had been through, he was still protecting the younger ones. 2 days later, Ambassador Krell returned with a larger diplomatic fleet. This time, he wasn't alone. Supreme Chancellor Vex, the leader of the Zalorian Empire, appeared on the main screen of the Liberty. Vex was older than Krell, with darker gray skin and scars across his face. When he spoke, his voice was cold and formal. "Admiral Cooper, I am Supreme Chancellor Vex. I have come to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Cooper's voice was filled with anger. "You kidnapped and experimented on 400 human children. What part of that is a misunderstanding?" "The research conducted at this facility was approved by our Science Council. We believed we were studying subjects that had been legally acquired." General Paul Martinez, who had arrived with reinforcements, stepped forward. "Chancellor, we've analyzed your records. This facility has been operating for over 50 years. You've been taking children from dozens of different worlds." Vex's expression didn't change. "The subjects were used for important research into cognitive development and species adaptation. The knowledge gained has been valuable for understanding how different species think and react." Dr. Price couldn't stay quiet anymore. "You're talking about children like they're laboratory animals. These are thinking, feeling beings with families who love them." "Emotion is inefficient," Vex replied coldly. "Our research showed that most species lose their ability to adapt when faced with stress, but human children remained remarkably resilient. We needed to understand why. Admiral Cooper realized something important. You're afraid of us, aren't you? That's what this is really about. Vex was quiet for a long moment. Humans expand faster than any species we have encountered. You adapt to new environments quickly. You solve problems in ways we cannot predict. We needed to understand if this was learned behavior or something inherent in your species. So you tortured our children to learn our secrets. We studied them to understand your species' potential threat level. The Bridge of the Liberty fell silent. Everyone understood now. The Zalorians hadn't just been conducting experiments. They had been preparing for war. In the medical bay, Alex Turner was talking to Dr. Rodriguez again. Doctor, I remembered something else. The tall alien, he was talking to someone on a communication device. He said the human children were teaching them things they didn't expect. What kind of things? He said that even the youngest ones kept making up stories about being rescued. They would tell each other fairy tales about brave heroes coming to save them. The alien said they couldn't understand why humans created hope when there was no logical reason for it. Dr. Rodriguez smiled sadly. That's because hope is what makes us human, Alex. Meanwhile, back on Earth, families were gathering at military bases around the world. The parents of Danny Walsh, now in their 60s, sat in a waiting room at Andrews Air Force Base. They had never stopped believing their son was alive somewhere. Mrs. Walsh, a military officer, said gently, "We have some news about your son, Daniel." Danny's mother looked up with tears in her eyes. Is he alive?" "Yes, ma'am. He's alive and safe. But I need to prepare you for something difficult. He's still physically 16 years old." Danny's father stood up slowly. "We don't care. We just want our boy back." The same scene was playing out in family homes across Earth. Parents who had grieved for decades were learning that their children were coming home. But they were coming home as the same frightened kids who had disappeared so many years ago. On the Liberty, Admiral Cooper made a decision that would change everything. "Chancellor Vex, you have 48 hours to provide us with the locations of all other facilities holding human subjects. You will also hand over all research data and all personnel involved in these experiments. And if we refuse?" Cooper's voice was ice cold. "Then we will consider it an act of war. And Chancellor, let me tell you something about humans that your research might have missed. When someone threatens our children, we don't give up. Ever." Chancellor Vex stared at Admiral Cooper through the communication screen for a long time. His large black eyes showed no emotion, but his hands were shaking slightly. "Admiral, you do not understand the situation," Vex said finally. "Our empire is dying. Our people have lost the ability to adapt and grow. For centuries, we have watched younger species surpass us in technology and culture. So you decided to steal our children to learn our secrets? We hope to save our civilization by understanding yours." Vex looked tired suddenly. "Your species appeared in the galaxy only recently, yet you advance faster than races that have existed for thousands of years. We needed to know why." Dr. Helen Price stepped forward. "Chancellor, what exactly did your research tell you about human children?" Vex was quiet for a moment, then began speaking in a voice filled with something that sounded almost like wonder. "We discovered that human children possess something we have never seen in any other species. Even under the worst conditions, they never stop believing that tomorrow will be better." On the medical deck, 15-year-old Alex Turner was sitting with Dr. Rodriguez, sharing more of what he had overheard during his captivity. "The aliens were really confused by us kids," Alex said. "I heard them talking about how we would make up games even when we were scared. They couldn't understand why we would tell each other jokes or sing songs when we should have been hopeless." "What else did they say?" "The tall one said that their own children are taught from birth to accept whatever happens to them. They don't question things or try to change their situation. But human kids kept trying to escape, kept making plans, kept hoping someone would come save us." Dr. Rodriguez nodded. "That hope is what kept you strong, Alex." "I know. And the weird thing is, it made the aliens kind of sad. The tall one said their people used to be like us a long time ago. but they lost that feeling over thousands of years. Back on the bridge, Chancellor Vex was continuing his explanation. Our scientists studied your children for decades, trying to understand this quality you call hope. They discovered that human children, even when isolated and afraid, would create imaginary friends, tell themselves stories about rescue, and find ways to play games with simple objects. Admiral Cooper felt his anger growing. You tortured innocent children to study their hope? We studied them to save our dying culture, Vex replied. But something unexpected happened. The longer our researchers worked with human children, the more they began to change. What do you mean, change? The Zilorian scientists began to feel emotions they had not experienced in centuries. They started to care about the children's welfare. Some even began to question the ethics of the experiments. Dr. Price looked interested. Your people were learning empathy from the children? Yes, and it was spreading beyond the research facilities. Reports of these emotional changes reached our homeworld. Our leaders became concerned that human influence was making our people weak. Supreme Chancellor Vex paused, and when he continued, his voice was different. Softer somehow. Admiral Cooper, I must tell you something that my government does not know I am sharing. There are indeed 12 other facilities, but most of them have been abandoned. Why? Because the Zilorian staff at those facilities began to release the subjects. They could no longer continue the experiments after working with human children for years. Admiral Cooper couldn't believe what he was hearing. Your own people freed our children? Many of them, yes. The researchers said that watching human children maintain their hope and kindness even in captivity changed something fundamental in their thinking. On Earth, President Clark was meeting with the families of the rescued children. Danny Walsh's parents sat across from him in the Oval Office. Mr. President, Danny's father said, we just want to know when we can see our son. The ships will be returning to Earth in 3 days, President Clark replied. But I want you to understand that Danny is still physically and mentally 16 years old. He doesn't know that you've aged, that decades have passed. Danny's mother wiped tears from her eyes. We've been waiting for 22 years. We can wait a little longer if it means he's safe. The president looked at all the families gathered in the room. I want you to know that every person involved in these experiments will face justice. But I also want you to know that your children showed incredible strength. According to the reports, they took care of each other and never gave up hope. Back on the Liberty, Mary Johnson was working with the children to prepare them for going home. It was the hardest job she had ever done. Kids, I need to explain something important to you, she said to the group of rescued children. When you see your families, they're going to look older than you remember. 10-year-old Katie Foster raised her hand. How much older? Your parents have been waiting for you for many years. Some of them have gray hair now, and wrinkles, but they love you just as much as they did the day you were taken. Danny Walsh, who had become the unofficial big brother to all the younger children, spoke up. Mrs. Johnson, will our parents still recognize us? Oh, honey, yes. Parents never forget their children's faces. They'll know you immediately. 8-year-old Sarah Cooper started to cry. What if they have new kids now? What if they don't want us back? Danny moved over and put his arm around Sarah. That's not how families work, Sarah. My dad told me once that parents' hearts just get bigger when they have more kids to love. They don't run out of love. Meanwhile, Ambassador Krell was having a private conversation with Admiral Cooper. Admiral, there is something else you should know. The children in the other facilities that were released. Many of them have formed communities on various planets. What do you mean? The older children, the ones who were teenagers when released, they stayed together and helped raise the younger ones. They've created their own settlements on frontier worlds. Cooper was amazed. They formed their own families. Yes, and something remarkable happened. These communities have become some of the most successful colonies in the galaxy. Other species have begun to request human colonists to help them build their own settlements. Dr. Price smiled. The same qualities that made them good test subjects made them excellent colonists. Exactly. Their hope, their ability to adapt, their care for each other. These traits have made them natural leaders and community builders. 3 days later, the Liberty and the rest of the Third Fleet arrived at Earth. Thousands of people gathered at the spaceports to welcome the children home. Danny Walsh was the first to step off the shuttle. His parents, now in their 60s, waited at the bottom of the ramp. For a moment nobody moved, then Danny ran toward them. "Mom, Dad," he called out, and suddenly he was 16 years old again, hugging his parents like he had never left. Similar scenes played out across the spaceport as families were reunited after decades of separation. But the real surprise came when Chancellor Vex arrived on Earth a week later. He wasn't coming as an enemy, he was coming to ask for help. "President Clark," Vex said during their meeting, "my people have learned something from studying your children. We have forgotten how to hope, how to dream, how to imagine better futures. What are you asking for? We would like to send some of our young people to learn alongside human children, not as prisoners or test subjects, but as students and friends." President Clark looked at the alien leader. "You want cultural exchange instead of kidnapping?" "Yes. We realize now that the qualities we tried to steal from your children can only be learned through friendship and shared experience." 6 months later, the first joint human-Zalorian school opened on a neutral world. Danny Walsh, now trained as a teacher and counselor, was among the first staff members. On the first day of school, he watched as human and Zalorian children played together in the playground. A young Zalorian girl had fallen and scraped her knee. Without being asked, Katie Foster, now 11 years old but with the wisdom of someone who had survived much more, helped the alien child to her feet and walked her to the nurse's office. Danny smiled as he watched them go. The Zalorians had spent decades trying to understand what made human children special. The answer had been simple all along. It wasn't something you could study or steal. It was something you could only learn by becoming part of the human family. Thank you. Old prison facility where the children had been held was converted into a memorial and research center. But this time, the research was different. Scientists from many species came there to study not how to exploit hope and kindness, but how to nurture and protect these qualities in all children throughout the galaxy. And in the center of the memorial stood a simple plaque with words written by Alex Turner, who had become a diplomat working to protect children's rights across the galaxy. Hope cannot be taken, only shared.